Russian, a language that is most widely spoken in the largest country of this planet called Russia. Russian is a language spoken by approximately 260 million speakers worldwide, which is an official language in Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. What if I told you you could start speaking basic Russian in just 1 week?
Wait a minute, is that even possible?
Before I show you how this challenge went, I would like to introduce myself. I'm from Belgium and I've always been fascinated by languages throughout my entire life. I currently speak 5 languages and a little bit of Czech, trying to learn Russian as well.
Привет, меня зовут Тео. Я хочу выучить русский язык.
Learning languages can be very boring sometimes. That's why I want to make this 7-day challenge as fun and as interactive as possible. By, for example, singing a Russian song, watching Russian videos, and making some Russian food.
So you might ask yourself, why do I want to learn Russian?
I already know how to speak a couple of Roman languages and a couple of Germanic languages, but Slavic languages though are kinda new to me. In one of my previous videos, I decided to learn how to speak Czech. Now, Czech is spoken by approximately 11 million people and Russian is spoken by approximately 260 million people. This of course means that it would make much more sense for me to know how to speak Russian if I'm meeting a stranger, since it's more likely that they're gonna speak Russian than Czech. Now, by the end of this challenge, I want to test myself by making an A1 basic Russian test. Now, my approach for learning this language in 7 days goes as follows. First of all, I want to learn as much basic common words as possible.
Я, сто, он, bila.
I want to learn the new alphabet.
A, B, V, G, D.
Of course, I have to learn basic verbs and conjugations.
Я bil, ты бил, он бил, мы били.
And lastly, I want to learn basic Russian sentences.
Меня зовут Тео. Я устал. Говоришь по-русски?
On the first day and on the last day of the challenge, I practiced the Russian alphabet. The Russian alphabet is a version of the Cyrillic alphabet, and trust me, as a person who has mostly used the Latin alphabet for my entire life, I have to say that using this new alphabet hasn't been easy.
Whilst I was learning the Russian alphabet, there were a couple of things that stood out to me. Some letters in Russian you simply don't pronounce. So what is the function of those letters then? Well, for example, the soft sign in Russian is used for indicating the softening of the preceding consonant. Now this means that the soft sign can change the way you pronounce a word. Another thing that stood out to me was realizing that some letters in Russian that look the same as the letters in the Latin alphabet sound completely different. So for example, here we have the letter B. It sounds like V in the Latin alphabet. Some letters were easy to pronounce, A, B, V, G, D, and some letters were very difficult to pronounce. Sh, sh, sh. And by the way, if there's any Russian-speaking people watching this video, please tell me if I'm pronouncing these letters good.
A quick fact in the Russian language while I was learning it is that they don't use articles. For example, the word a or the is simply not used in Russian, which means the meaning of a sentence often depends entirely on the context.
To pass this Russian A1 test, I have to learn as many Russian common words as possible. Some important word groups that I learned are the personal pronouns, numbers, один, два, три, четыре, пять, common nouns, basic adjectives and basic prepositions. Красный, синий, зеленый, желтый. And I also learned words related to food items and drinks. Examples of food items are, for example, pelmeni and borscht, and an example of a Russian drink is kvass. Now, I really wanted to integrate myself as much as possible in the Russian culture, and that's why I decided to make a Russian soup called borscht. Now, before I show you how the cooking process went, I want to quickly share with you a language hack that I learned throughout this week. Try to record yourself while pronouncing new words and then listen to what you said so that you can easily identify your mistakes. In this way, I think you're gonna really level up your speaking skills and pronunciation skills in that language.
Borscht is a cultural staple across Eastern Europe and not specifically in Russia. There are many variations of borscht and some variations are even made with different meats like pork, beef or chicken. I decided to make the borscht without meat. Now, beets are the main ingredient of borscht, which gives it the typical deep red color. Here's a list of all of the ingredients to make borscht, and if you want to make borscht yourself at home, I'm gonna put a link under the video of the recipe that I used. To make the borscht even taste better, it's typically served with sour cream and dill. Now, it tasted alright, but the thing is I never tried real borscht, so I cannot compare it to something else.
To pass that A1 test, I really need to learn some basic sentences as well. For example, declarative sentences, questions, negative sentences, asking for directions, and a couple of other types of sentences I try to learn. To make learning all of these sentences a fun process, I try to make a skit.
Как дела? Хорошо, спасибо. Нормально. Плохо. Где автобусная станция? Я не знаю. У вас разве нет Google Maps? Вы говорите по-русски? Немного.
When learning the Russian verbs, I focused myself primarily on only learning the Russian verbs in the present tense. I could start learning all of the other tenses as well, but that simply isn't possible in 1 week. In Russian, verbs are divided into two main conjugation groups. The first conjugation group has the infinitive endings at, yat, yet, and the second conjugation verbs usually have as an infinitive ending it. In both of those conjugation groups, there are typical conjugation patterns, which means that a lot of Russian verbs have the same conjugation pattern. This means that if you know the conjugation pattern of the verbs ending with the infinitive form it, you will know how to conjugate a lot of other verbs as well. So for example, verbs with the infinitive endings in it have the following conjugation pattern. For the first person singular, it's u, you. For the second person singular, it's ish, and then it follows with it, im, ite, at, yat. Now that you know all of this, I've got a question for you. If you know that the verb to speak is говорить in Russian, then how would you conjugate говорить in the first person singular form?
After an intensive week trying to learn the most important things in a short amount of time, I finally decided to take the test.
So I just finished making the test and I only had a score of 9 out of 25. I forgot to take a screenshot of that test, so I decided to remake the test and then I had a score of 12 out of 25.
The point of this challenge was to try to be as effective as possible with a little amount of time. Even though I had low scores, I was still kind of satisfied with my results. I had very little knowledge of Russian before starting this challenge and I only practiced Russian for 1 hour every single day. After having done this challenge to get to a basic level of Russian, I know now that I have to practice a lot more. So if you have the same dream as me to learn a new language, to discover new cultures, just go for it. Be ambitious because you won't regret it. Thank you for watching, stay ambitious and see you on the next one.